First, let me start off by thanking India Ideas Conclave for inviting me yet again. I've been associated with this initiative for many years now, since its inception. And each year, I find that this provides a basic framework for an exchange of ideas, and far more important, it also gives the opportunities for various like-minded individuals who are otherwise scattered all over the country to actually come together and meet each other. And sometimes I see that the feeling of isolation which a lot of people otherwise nurture gets dispelled when they actually come here and meet other like-minded people who have broadly common concerns. Now that's the compliment part of it. Now, 3 days ago, I received an email from the organizers of this conference saying, we've scheduled a session for you, which is a conversation with the Chief Minister of Uttar Pradesh, Yogi Adityanath. So I wrote back, thank you very much, but in what language? Now my friend Giri, who I met here, said, I was really hoping you'd accept that because we wanted a version of the Cartoon Network here. Now, am I to conclude that just because my Hindi is, to put it mildly, an instrument whereby you can learn Bengali, does that mean that I should share Navjot Singh Sidhu's idea that it's impossible for him to interact with people from southern India, he being a Sadaji from Amritsar? Now, I get along very famously with Naresh Gujral, who also comes from Punjab, whose background goes back to West Punjab. I get along famously with my friend Baijant Panda, who speaks in Odia and English. I'm sure if I lapse into Bengali, he'll understand it, just as he lapses into Odia, I can understand it. With his Chief Minister, I have no problem. We have a common language, which is not Odia. So the question really arises, and this comes up numerous times. For instance, Bengalis like me, we celebrated Durga Puja a few days ago. It's a lavish festival, 5 days of festivities, etc. Now, one of the things about Durga Puja is that there is very little restraint as far as food is concerned in those 5 days. The Bengalis are temperamentally non-vegetarian, although there are certain days when they have vegetarian food. Whereas in Navratri, which is equally a festival which coincides with that, the fare is almost entirely vegetarian. Now you can say that what links, and I'm taking off from Naresh Gujral's intervention here, what links the two? This is diversity. Yes, it's diversity. But is it really difference? That's a question which I want to pose to you. There is fundamentally, it's a question worth probing. Why do so many Indians interact with each other? Why is it that the footsteps, that the footprints of our pilgrimage centers are not local specific? Why is it that Bengalis go to Puri? It's one of the most sacred sites for Bengalis. Why do they go to Kamakhya in Assam? Why do they go to Varanasi? There is something in India which is called a sacred geography. It's a term which I'm using from someone else. There is that unity. And that unity is not determined whether Lord Ayappa is worshipped in that avatar in Assam, or whether the form of worship, the Shakta form of worship in eastern India differs fundamentally from the Shakta temples in southern India. There are important differences. There are differences in rites. Why is it that in the Amarnath caves, the priest is a Nambudri Brahmin from Kerala, one extreme to the other? So there is something which is inherently Indian. A lot of people can get misled. A certain, in the 19th century, Lytton Strachey, for instance, pointed out that the first thing to learn about India was that there never was, and there never will be an India. That was the perception he had, based on the fact that, they're very different. The Rajputs are very different from the Tamils. They're very different somewhere else. Yes, there is an element of superficial difference. But what binds it is something else. And it's very intangible to be able to try and codify what defines the unity of India. If you try and write it down, what are the 10 points that were? You'll get someone else saying, no, that's not true, that's not true. And you'll get the Sidhu type conclusion. So people have tried to get out of this and say, look, this is too complicated a subject for us to address. So the basis of unity of India has to be the Constitution of India. This is a notion which is increasingly coming into vogue, a subject called constitutional patriotism. It's a word you'll find increasingly being used more and more. We've heard this term called constitutional morality. We'll use the term constitutional patriotism. It's a term which was borrowed from Germany in 1945. It was a term which was brought in partly because in 1945, Germans wanted to make a new start because they had a very, very troubled history which they did not want to invoke. So they said, how do we put a curtain on the past? And how do we only see 1945 as year zero? Now, are we going to say that for us, 1950, that year the Constitution was invoked, or say 1947, is the year zero for India? That is very troubling. Because that negates the very basis on which our nationhood is centered. The Constitution is very important. And Naresh Gujral is entirely right to say that we should, because it sets out the rules of public life. And it's important that the rules of public life must be specified. What can be done, what cannot be done. But it certainly does not define what the basis of nationhood is. How can socialism define what the basis of? The moment you tried to codify something called secularism, you got yourself into even bigger muddle. Before that, it was a nebulous, understated, understood thing. For some people, it meant equality. For some people, it meant tolerance. For some people, it meant irreligiousness. But it was left somewhere out there. The moment you try and codify things, you get into problems, just as like you've got into problem in Sabarimala, where a notion of abstract equality goes against certain long traditions. It's that superimposition of one on the other. So the diversity of India, whereby Lord Jagannath sleeps, I think from 12 to about 3 o'clock is the time when the mandir is closed, in the Puri temple is closed, because Lord Jagannath is having his rest. Now if you say, look, that violates the working hours in public places, it would be an interesting argument. And no doubt that argument could work in some places. But if you were to use that argument and put it there, you're going to get yourself into all sorts of muddle. There are customs. When we go to gurdwaras, we cover our heads. It's sign of basic respect for a custom. It's also an acknowledgement that in India, whether it's the Hindu religion or what is called Hindu religion, whether it's a religion at all or it's a larger civilizational concept, is thing. Whether the type of Islam practiced in Jammu and Kashmir is the same as that in Saudi Arabia, it's not. The belief structures are at some places very, very different. The rites and customs are very, very different. They grew out of very, very common but different traditions. So it's that. So the biggest challenge to our cultural diversity, the biggest challenge to our sacred geography actually lies in this mindless imposition of a single norm on India. And I think this point I would like to hammer, that it is not a question of equality of everything, one size fits all for everything. It cannot be. And Naresh was quite completely right, that the one size fits all policy when it came to freight equalization in Eastern India caused absolute havoc. There was this notion called the redistributive center. Now, there is an element of redistributive center which is very, very important. For instance, when Bihar was divided between Jharkhand and Bihar, all the mineral-rich areas went to Jharkhand, and Bihar was left as an agricultural thing. Now, you needed a helping hand. You need a helping hand for Bihar to climb up. So, I would say that when we are talking about the unity of India, let us not try and codify things. Let us remember that at the end of the thing, it is very much an emotional construct, and it is everything which needs to be done to enhance that emotional connect between all parts of India, to be aware that it's there, to have a certain degree of innate respect. Not like what Shashi Tharoor says, why does the Prime Minister go and wear funny hats in Nagaland? Funny hats. Now someone might think the turban in Rajasthan is funny. So it's that those people today who claim that they are the greatest architect of unity are basically today talking about a mindless uniformity. And it's that uniformity which, again to go back to what Naresh said, was responsible for the disintegration of the Soviet Union, which will probably lead to greater stresses and strains in China, and which is the bane of modern existence, the quest for modernity disguised as uniformity. Thank you very much.